So what I would like to do is to try and answer the following two questions, which are not so easy to do at this very early stage of such a pandemic, but I'll try to do it as much as I can. The first one is to a little bit define better what we call the dynamics behind pandemics during history. And then I will try to see, based on that, that understanding of the dynamics, try to see the long-term implications of this very specific pandemic. So just to remind all of us, we have been in competition with the viruses for forever. As far as we know, it has been coming again and again, every epoch, sometimes every decade, sometimes every century, but it has caused so much damage that we tend to just put it in our subconsciousness until the next time it comes. By the way, we are still on another pandemic, which is the HIV pandemic. As far as we know, there were already some 40 million casualties from that pandemic. And of course, we are now on this recent one. If I am to sum up the driving force, not the causes of pandemics, but the dynamics behind the causes of pandemics, I would just, summarize it in as simple as possible as follows. Humanity, this species has done something unusual in evolution, which is the domestication of animals. Now, if you take that phenomena of domestication further in time, we were able, because of that, the domestication, to develop new ways of transportation. The moment we started really developing faster ways of transportation, we started communicating with each other. And in order really to trade with each other, we have developed what we call currencies or money. The outcome of that very long process is what we call nowadays urbanization. And of course, in the last 300-400 years, what we call industrialization, and recently globalization. And the outcome of all of these are what we call now the mega cities in which we are all living. The mega cities are probably the most important thing that humanity has done during millennia, and the outcome of that phenomena is, of course, a lot of very positive things, but the outcome of that phenomena is also what we call pandemics. So we went from skin shelters to high-rise all over the world. By the way, I'm at this very moment just at that spot that you see over there, and over here if you don't see it. And I'm on Roosevelt Island and part of on a sabbatical on Cornell Tech. Anyway, if we are just to take a very large look at some of the plagues that devastated humanity, you can see that the percentage of death from the people that were infected is really going up and down, and there are reasons for that. But I would like just you to remember the numbers, because we are really in something that is much greater than we can understand at this point in time. So if you take a look at the bubonic plague, 95% of people that were infected actually died at the end, and it was devastating. It actually killed about a quarter of world population. The Black Plague, that's everybody is speaking about as the most devastating thing. It was not exactly the most devastating thing, as far as we know again. It killed only a third of humanity, but it started, we probably don't know the plagues and the pandemics that were not recorded during millennia before that. And there are some studies that are speaking that humanity almost, this Homo sapiens, as much as we know this species, about 60,000 years ago, almost vanished. There were left only something like 10,000 people on Earth about 60,000 years ago. And one of the reasons, of course, is great pandemics that used to occur time after time. We are now here in the early years of the third decade of the 21st century. And if you see, we are already reaching 6.1 million people that died from this pandemic. As far as I found a few days ago, we are at the rate of about 4 million more people that are going to die in this coming year, in 2022. And probably these numbers are just the very lowest estimates that at the end we will have on our hands. There is a phenomena very known that most of the time we double the numbers that are formally published. At this time, there are a lot of studies that are saying that are, even having some indications that we will have to quadruple the numbers that we will have at hand at the end, of course, of this pandemic. Now, we reached a point in which really our civilization is very urban, and we are so packed together that probably it's not going to end with this pandemic, and we are going to see new pandemics that will occur every decade or a couple decades in the future, unless we're going to change totally our civilization. At least we know that our urban life or lifestyle as we know it now started something like the big fire that London experienced in the 17th century. And it is clear that the more humans have suffered from great disasters, they were always trying to figure out the reasons, trying to develop and invent new tools in order to take its civilization to a new level of course, organization and better life for everyone. If I am to sum up the most important things that humanity has developed that brought us into this very current level of organization, I'll try to do it in a very simple way in order to try to understand how it's going to affect the future of civilization in the 21st century. So the first invention that really started what we call now cities is when Romans in Pompeii invented the sheets of glass, and the idea was to protect from wind and rain, and of course it helped light penetrate into those dark enclaves that humans used to live in. If you add to that glass some cement and some iron, and we are at the beginning of what we call cities. The chimney was the second invention, and that was something unusual because that helped ventilate the smoke of those small living rooms in which we used to live, to sleep, to eat all together. Of course, the most important thing of that invention is that it has pushed, that was the driving force of what we call nowadays privacy. And since then, people started providing different kinds of rooms until we reached just, a couple centuries ago, the ability to build, buildings that are 6 or at most seven floors. And the idea was people didn't want to take stairs more than 6 or 7 floors. The third invention, which was really crucial in our urbanization civilization, is the elevator's safety brake. And that convinced people that they can safely, rise more than those 6, 7 floors. The end of it, of course, is crucial because that the combination of chimney with elevators caused architects to develop different or a few rooms on each place or each, let's say, bubble of residency, and that pushed humanity to start developing values like modesty, like social classes, because everybody wanted to do it in a different way. Of course, it differentiated between lifestyles, different places, different nations, different cultures, developed new kinds of those small spaces. And of course, the most important thing is that when privacy has developed, then each one started generating new and unique ideas that continued pushing our society and our civilization further. And that brings me to the current mega fire that probably is going to change urban civilization. It will take some time, but probably we have just started a new phase in our development, at least in our lifestyle, in our way of living and working, etc., etc. What you see here is the bloom of the COVID-19 virus under the electron microscope, and some of the researchers are speaking that it is much worse than the fire that consumed 4/5 of London. It is the main cause that it has happened is because we are so packed, and we are so packed really in manners that we have to develop new things in order to continue our civilization. The idea is that there is now some debate, what is the next invention that is going to push forward our civilization? And some of us are speaking about, of course, the drones that are going to enable everybody to stay in their bubbles, work, eat, and of course, exchange ideas. And from time to time, we will have just, to face each other. But if this is really going to happen, because not just the COVID-19, but because of what we expect is going still to happen in the next decade or two, then it's probably going to have a great effect. So if we are to sum up what we have went through, we went through the prairie dwelling to caves to villages to mega cities. At this very moment on Earth, humanity is condensed something like a little bit more than 50%, 56% of humanity is condensed on cities. By 2050, we are speaking about 70% of humanity that is going to be condensed in cities. And this is really a landmark in human evolution. And we are trying to understand not the very long term of this trend, but at least the near future, if you wish. For us, near future means something like 30, 50 years ahead. And this is what I'm going to try to do. It is clear that cities have been developing in the last 300 years, as we see here, have almost reached their peak of efficiency, and decay is becoming more and more relevant in whatever we are watching. And probably in 200 years from now or 300 years from now, we will have to develop very different kind of urban lives. I'm just giving you, some ideas that are being published in different venues, trying to understand better how lifestyle of the future is going to develop, how we are going to be organized, what kind of work we are going to be able to work in environments that are much more packed with people. Okay, so we are trying to do it, and I'm going to share with you one study that I'm a part of. It's a study that is using a methodology called Delphi. It's a variation of Delphi. You are probably aware of that methodology. And the idea is to take a group of experts from different perspectives. All of them, of course, are future-oriented in their expertise, and try to see if a group of people will accept or agree upon what might happen in the next 30 to 50 years. The person that is running this study and leading us is Professor Alal from George Washington University. But I'm giving you here just a very short list of the people that are part of this study. We are constantly working on publishing some papers about the outcome of these conversations. And by the way, if you are not familiar with the idea of Delphi, the most important characteristic of this methodology is that all the discussions are anonymous, so that nobody will have a great impact because of its stature, etc. So what we have found is the following. We've found that probably we are at the verge of a new consciousness that humanity is going to start experiencing, and of course exercising in many ways. Okay, so I'm going to try and explain it through a quantum physics very known phenomena, which is called entanglement. What we have found in quantum physics is that, for example, two photons can be linked in space, even if you wish, through galaxies. And if you act on one of these particles, the other particle is acting or behaving the same way as the particle that is nearby, and you are trying to somehow influence. So I'm taking the idea of entanglement, and what we're speaking about is that probably this crisis, this pandemic, which is really global, that in a matter of a couple months, there was no single place on earth that was not infected. This pandemic is going to push forward something that has already happened, that has already begun to happen, but it's going to take a different and a much evolved stage, in which we will understand better how entangled humans are with, not just with each other, but with its environment, with the animals that are around him, with almost everything that engulfs human beings. So I'm going to pick up some of what of us were speaking about, just to give you some sense of this entangled consciousness that we are speaking about. Okay, for example, Professor Neatula is the chair of the Future Studies in UNESCO. He says the following. He says that as we all know that communism has collapsed during the early years of the 90s. And a lot of people are trying to understand what really happened that communism collapsed in such a manner. Nobody expected a collapse that, as we have seen it in a matter of really a year or a couple of years. Everybody was thinking that it will take it at least a decade. So one of the reasons that most of the experts agree upon, that was the reason, at least, behind the collapse of communism, was that they didn't understand really the information age. They didn't understand. They couldn't adjust to the idea that information is flowing in a very different way than it used to be when they, established the ideology of communism. And this is one of the reasons that it has collapsed. And what Suhail is trying to anticipate is actually believes very much that even capitalism is now at the same verge of crisis. And the reason is that he's saying capitalism really doesn't understand the whole meaning, the whole impact of automated knowledge. And one of the outcomes of that phenomena is, of course, what we all call fake news, etc., etc. And he says that in a matter of probably a decade or so, there will be so many outcomes to those to that phenomena that it will bring to its knees the ideology, the infrastructures, of course, the financial infrastructures of what we call nowadays capitalism. If I will introduce you to someone else, Professor Fletcher from New Zealand, she is a very interesting political scientist that is constantly researching, studying how challenging epochs in history has caused not just turmoil, and how those challenging epochs have developed, has pushed humanity to reorganize itself politically, economically, etc., etc. So what she's saying is that this pandemic also is going to act as it has acted for millennia on human civilization. And the basic thing that is happening most of the time is that the most acknowledged people and movers in science, in politics, in economy, most of the time they are losing their authority, and the fringe of ideas are becoming are coming into the forefront of the mainstream platforms, thinkers, etc., etc. And those fringe ideas, humanity is trying to figure out what might help its civilization to, first of all, overcome the crisis, and then not just overcome the crisis, but continue and go to a higher level, if you wish, of its development and evolution. That's Amy. What I have contributed to this group is the following. I said probably we're going to see two stages, two phases to the crisis that is going to be part of humanity in the next at least 30 years. I agreed that the current globalization paradigm, I'm not speaking about capitalism like Suhail, I'm speaking about the globalization paradigm, is going to be very much challenged because of this crisis. And there are a lot of reasons. Unfortunately, I don't have time to elaborate on them, but we all feel that something is really happening to globalization. Specifically, by the way, after what we are seeing now with Russia and Ukraine, but it's only at the beginning of something much bigger that is happening in all fronts, almost from from security level, geopolitical, political issues, economic issues. Everything is being shaken by part of it, of course, this pandemic. And what I'm saying is that the flow of the current globalization paradigm is since the most important tenet of that paradigm of what we call the mutual cooperation is based only on voluntary interest. The more I think, or a nation thinks that global affairs are for their favors, for their interest, then they are willing to be part of larger groups. The moment they see that their interest is not exactly aligned with the common interest, then they are retreating. And we are seeing it almost in Brexit. We are seeing it in economic issues. We're seeing it even with in this very specific pandemic, when Trump retreated from very important institutes that were supposed to help humanity not reach the level of pandemic that we have experienced. So this is the first stage of challenge that humanity is going to experience in the next decade or two. The next phase of this
we have
phenomenon,
about 5 minutes left. I'm sorry.
I'm about to finish in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. And the second stage of this development is probably a new kind of paradigm of cooperation that is going to emerge from the collapse of the current globalization paradigm. And the idea is that we will start developing institutes where we will start. It's exactly what happened after the Spanish flu. We have started organizing ourselves with new institutes, global institutes, services, health services that will help help us not slide again to a devastating pandemic. So with the same thing, we're going to start generating ideas and the paradigms of new institutes that are more geared towards experiencing or actualizing or realizing the idea behind the symbiosis or the inextricable ties that we are going to bit by bit, with great difficulties, with a lot of political clashes between groups. We are bit by bit, we're going to develop new mechanisms that will establish that interdependency, that the consciousness we are speaking about will be realized. It will take humanity another century or two to fully mature that kind of consciousness, but we probably have started that development. And as it has happened always in evolution, those kind of crises are only a springboard that push human civilization to higher levels. I believe that that's all what I have to say. If I had to have time, I would go and explain how it's going to change our corporate values and a lot of other aspects of our dealings with each other. But I believe that my time is over, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to share some ideas. Unfortunately, and I'm sorry about that, I won't be able to stay for the Q&A. But if you have any question, please send me an email. I'll be very glad to answer as much as possible. I didn't take into account the exact hours between us, and I'm sorry about that. And thank you for the opportunity to switch the slot with I don't remember the name of the person who was supposed to be the first in this session. So thank you very much.